Good morning to you. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning to you. Good morning. It's Fabulous Friday. It's Finance Friday. Good morning, good morning, good morning. And welcome to Daring Dialogues. I am your host, Shantae Charles. I hope that everybody is having a fabulous, fantastic Friday thus far. That was a lot of F's. Fabulous, fantastic Friday thus far. Try to say that fast and see if you can do it. All right. We are talking about capital, cash, credit. Capital, cash, credit. Remember, we're going to be doing this probably all through the next month, hopefully, as well. Good morning to everyone. I want to say good morning to the We Dare Squad in the conversation box. If you would like to be a part of the conversation box, go ahead and follow me. And then as I check out your profile, I will follow you back, and then you'll be able to chat in the conversation box. I want to thank those of you who are watching also on YouTube live stream, those of you who are watching by your Twitter feed. Good morning, Lady Judy. Those of you who are watching by your personal computers, I don't take it for granted that you spend this hour with me Monday through Friday. Some of you only pop in for specific subject matter, and that's okay. But I do thank you for your time, whether you're with me all week long or whether you're with me for one day. Also, if you are enjoying the broadcast, please feel free to shoot me an email. Tell me what you like. Tell me what you think of the broadcast. Tell me even where you think I can improve. Tell me about a subject that you have not heard on the broadcast, but maybe you would want me to share a little bit about what I know, or if I can actually find a book on that subject, I will read a little bit from that subject for those of you who are interested in hearing about some other things. We're trying to cover as many subjects as we possibly can during the week, but as you know, we can't get to it all. All right? So, as I definitely want to start out, I'm trying to start out with a history of the black dollar, so we can understand historically, okay, that black people were the cash, the capital, and the credit. All right. So I keep seeing these conversations online of black Americans who do not understand why we are so far behind. We are so far behind because we were the dollar. Okay. So you can't be the dollar and spend the dollar. Okay. I hope everybody understands that. At one point, your ancestors were the capital, they were the cash, they were the credit, and they themselves, the bodies of your ancestors, were insured. When slavery ended, all of that financial piece became locked up in what they call now stocks and bonds. All right? Stocks and bonds. That wealth was transferred into stocks and bonds. The actual Wall Street, in case you didn't know, was a place where they actually sold slaves at the New York Stock Person Exchange. All right. And underneath the New York Stock Exchange is actually slave quarters. I know some of y'all didn't know that. All right. So literally, the bedrock of the financial district in New York City is where they used to sell slaves, your ancestors. Okay, if you're a descendant of a slave, all right? A stolen person, a descendant of a stolen person. Because nobody in God's idea of the world, nobody is born a slave. All right? So I want people to understand that, because I keep seeing these conversations about what black people are not doing. And if black people would just do this, and if black people would just do that, then they could move ahead. Sir, ma'am, we have about a 220-year wealth gap for a reason. And the reason is the descendants of slaves were the cash, they were the capital, they were the credit, and they were insured. All of that system of slavery became translated into what we call the stock exchange with stocks and bonds. The other piece of that is the other part of the transferred value became value on land, which is why it is still to this day very hard for our government to want to give land to the descendants of slaves, because that would be a double loss. Okay, I had to take the value off of people and put it on land, and then the people that I can no longer make a coin from, you want me to turn around and give them the land where I had to transfer that value to. They don't want to hear that. All right. So we just need a basic understanding of how America got wealth. Okay. So we're back in History of the Black Dollar. And I want to read to you this section about King Cotton. I really like this book because each of the sections is maybe only a page and a half, so we can kind of get through it. All right. King Cotton, 1793. The enslavement of millions of slaves helped Europe to acquire the capital needed to finance the Industrial Revolution. In 1754, the number of slaves peaked at 250,000. At that time, the number of slaves in America were beginning to dwindle, a result of the Revolutionary War, with many believing that slavery was coming to an end. All right. So this is about 121 years before slavery actually came to an end. All right. And a technical end, I'll say it that way, through the Emancipation, Proclamation. All right. I did an analysis because I was reading this. I was reading this book last night, and I put up the picture. It's on Daring Dialogues, where it was a image drawn of actual slaves and their value at the time in the 1800s. And I calculated it up, and the group of slaves came to $2,025 in the 1860s. And then I went to the inflation calculator, all right, and I put in $2,000. $2,000 from then to now, that same value is worth now about a little over $500,000. And that was just with one group of slaves. So when you think about the dollar amount that was being put on them, and then taking that amount and putting it in stocks and bonds, say you had to sell your slaves or whatever, and that was their cash value, and you put that into the new system of stock and bonds, where today that $2,000 is about $500,000. All right, just to kind of give you an idea of the value that was had and added maybe to a family because of the slave trade. All right. So tobacco lands were beginning to deteriorate, and southern crop prices were declining. In 1789, the U.S. Congress was established, and in 1794, George Washington called southern slaves a very troublesome species of property. These are the people we have monuments to in D.C. So every time you go to D.C. and you walk and you see that obelisk, just remember that obelisk represents a man who called your ancestors troublesome species of property. Okay? However, technology intervened. Eli Whitney patented the cotton gin in 1793. Eli's father had solved the critical problem of removing seeds from cotton by developing a kind of comb to do the job. Whitney's cotton gin simply mechanized this comb. Suddenly, with profits on the horizon, the slave population jumped from 250,000 to 4 million. The demand for cotton from the North and Europe skyrocketed as the South had the best and cheapest cotton in the world. The slave economy then shifted from the upper South, Maryland and Virginia, to the lower South. While the slave trade was abolished in 1808, expansion of slavery continued into the lower South from the domestic slave trade of the upper South. All right? So that means the more production is needed, the more we have to kick out people. That means that there's a pressure and demand put on women and black men at the time. And then you get what is called these breeding farms, of where they were literally just putting human beings together and breeding them and putting them together sexually so that they could breed more children. Because at this point, they could no longer bring other slaves over legally. So you have this whole system of breeding farms. All right. The South experienced its first major nationally publicized uprising in 1822 in Charleston, South Carolina. After being suppressed by the city, Denmark Vesey, a free minister, planned an insurrection. However, the plan was exposed 2 months before the riot was to take place. Vesey was trialed and hung along with 36 co-planners. Charleston firmly displayed their punishment throughout the country to discourage any further uprising. By 1830s, cotton was king, and more than half of all U.S. exports consisted of slave-grown cotton. In fact, slaves grew 60% of the world's cotton. Not 60% of the United States cotton. 60% of the world's cotton. Thus, paying for a substantial amount of iron and manufactured goods that led to more American growth. So how did the Industrial Revolution get kicked off? It got kicked off because of the sales of cotton that was being produced by slaves who were being bred like sex animals to keep the country going. So when people say ignorant things like, well, what hand did your ancestors play in the Industrial Revolution? You can give them some background. All right. The increase of labor needed to grow and manage the cotton exasperated the slave population, and it began to worsen their treatment. This tension led to the most famous slave rebellion in the history of America, led by Nat Turner. A black slave in Southampton, Virginia, Nat received a vision from God to free the slaves. He started by uniting his friends, killing his masters, and moving on to kill all the slave owners in his surrounding neighborhood. His movement quickly grew in numbers and violence. His soldiers, as he referred to them, killed more than 50 white men, women, and children. The results of his rebellion are still felt throughout the veins of America today. Whites were terrified, increasing the amount of random arrests and attacks of blacks out of fear. So, one thing that happens is the more that whites began to fear insurrection or revolutionary acts and behavior, then they began to respond by randomly attacking black people to instill fear in them to not rebel and not get out of line. Hence, the random anonymous bombing of black people, successful black people, in Austin, Texas this week. All right? If you want to know, just a sidebar, if you want to know the actual true story of Nat Turner, one of my very good friends and fellow author, she's an award-winning author, actually wrote a series about what really happened. She went down to Virginia, went and looked at the courthouse documents and all of that stuff on Nat Turner, and she actually got the real deal. So I know people have seen Birth of a Nation. It is believed that some of the information in that film came out of her research, but I would like to point you to the actual books that you can pick up and they're called The Resurrection of Nat Turner by Sharon Ewell Foster. This is part 1, and this is what part 2 looks like. All right. The first one is part 1, the witnesses. Part 2, the testimony. All right. Just a little sidebar there. By 1850, 1.8 million of the 2.5 million slaves were on cotton plantations, primarily as field hands. Commercial crops produced by slaves required a host of middlemen. The North focused on a myriad of businesses that supported cotton production in the South, such as the textile factories, the insurance companies, the shippers, and the cotton brokers. The irony is not missed that Eli Whitney himself was a black slave. Why? Because we're black people during this time were known for inventing things to ease their own burden. And because of their condition and because of their status, most of their inventions went into the patented, the ownership of whoever owned them. All right. So he himself was a black slave known on paper as a white man named Sam. Plenty of slaves created inventions and new technologies, but they were not allowed to patent it themselves. So again, this is a whole other level to stolen wealth, because those patents never went into the hands of the people who actually invented the stuff, and therefore their relatives are not benefiting from the residual income that those patents would have provided. In 1858, the U.S. Attorney General ruled that since slaves were property, their ideas, including patents, were also the property of their masters. So again, when we talk about accumulating wealth and ways of accumulating wealth, back then, you could not even own your own patent because you were considered property. And again, remember, property in their eyes, according to the law, property couldn't own property. Get it? For this reason, many blacks, slave or free, would file patents in their lawyer's name to improve their chances of acceptance. So their idea got out there, but their lawyer got the income from it. All right? There was also another slave, Jefferson Davis, who created a new screw propeller for steam-driven ships. Naturally, it was not patented, but it did help the South progress in the war. Henry Blair became the first freedman to receive a patent in 1834 for a new seed planter. The cotton plantation economy was part of the much larger local, national, and international political economy. The financial, shipping, and manufacturing industries were all dependent on slave-produced cotton. Given that cotton ran the United States and the U.S. was competing for leadership in the global political economy, it is not arguable, and it is inarguable, that slaves were the foundation of the U.S. economy. Banks would provide seed investment to purchase land and slaves. Slaves were literally viewed as a form of property, a commodity that could easily be sold and converted into cash. Individually and collectively, they were often traded as collateral goods, services, and a multitude of business transactions. Slaveholders leveraged their slaves as shares of investments, using them to secure loans and pay off debt. Sometimes entire families would get destroyed from slaveholders placing bets they couldn't cover and would pay with a slave instead. When assessing estate values, the value of the slaves would be included. Taxes were even paid on slave transactions, providing a tax revenue source for local and state governments. Basically, the United States turned slavery into political capital, leveraging cotton. Taking it a step further, the U.S. Constitution incorporated the 3/5 Compromise that allowed the South to count their slaves as 3/5 of a person when calculating the state's representation in Congress. This shifted the balance of power from the North to the South. It is inconceivable that European colonists could have settled and developed North and South America and the Caribbean without slave labor. Moreover, slave labor did produce the major consumer goods that were the basis of world trade during the 18th and 19th century. World trade: coffee, cotton, rum, sugar, tobacco. All right? That's at least 5 markets that should be providing residual income to the descendants of slaves. In 1944, Eric Williams published a book titled Capitalism and Slavery, where he depicted slavery as the growth engine of Europe's global economy. In it, he states that the enslavement of millions of slaves helped Europe to acquire the capital needed to finance the Industrial Revolution. Thus, Europe and America's progress was paid for at the expense of black slaves who built the foundation for modern capitalism. No other people group that came to this country can claim this. All right? So yes, there will be people that come to this country, and they will feel as if they have the right to the same rights and privileges as the descendants of slaves. And I want to remind everybody that your ancestors don't have this claim to the right to be treated as human beings in this country. Your ancestors were not the bread and butter of the American economy, like the descendants of slaves were. There's no comparison. Try not to put a comparison there. All right? So yes, you are afforded the rights and privileges, but understand whose back you're getting the rights and privileges on, and respect that. Because a lot of people come over and they don't respect that. That's a whole other sermon. All right? Interestingly, it would be this same need for economic self-interest and preservation, not ethical obligation, that would cause the North to fight for the end of slavery nearly 300 years after its start. All right? So I like to lay groundwork before we get into all these other concepts, because some of these books speak about capitalism as if capitalism did not have a grounding and a foundation in being built from the bodies, the blood, the sweat, the tears, the abuse of black people in this country. And I don't ever want to forget it. Okay? I'm not going to ask any people group to forget what was done to their people group and how they made progress. Okay? I don't ask anybody else to forget their history, so don't ask me to forget mine. Got it? Good. All right. So we're back in The Capitalist Code, It Can Save Your Life by Ben Stein. And we're in a subject called Confident, Lusty, and Cheerful. And then he is going to go on to talk about the pre-dad class. My goal is to help create a few million more confident, cheerful people, obviously enjoying themselves in the advertisements and commercials until the final curtain sets. I want to help people to enjoy life, not just to create them on TV or on a magazine page, but to create the life they want in real life. There's a way to do it. It involves having some contact with the reality of our system, the capitalist system, our frequently reviled but beautiful reality. And it involves having a plan. The greatest genius about money since Adam Smith, Warren E. Buffett, has said, an idiot with a plan can beat a genius. But an idiot with a plan can beat a genius without a plan. My El Dorado, the gilded city of my dreams, is to give you that plan. It's a really basic plan. As I like to say, no one is too stupid to get it, but some are too smart. Chapter 3, the pre-dad class. Someone is sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago. I think that is a great analogy for the wealth of this country. There are a lot of people in this country who are sitting in the shade today because of all the seeds that were planted a long time ago by our ancestors. To continue with this little volume, some words about its genesis are in order. One day, say 25 years ago, I could start anywhere, but for now, let's start with my brilliant sister, Rachel Epstein of Brooklyn, New York. She is a spectacularly well-educated woman, a writer, housewife, and mother. She has been a fundraiser for various causes most of her adult life. One day, about 25 years ago, she returned from a fun gathering party in New Jersey to meet me for lunch. The organizers had raked in tons of money. I asked her if the women at the event were the wives of doctors and lawyers or business executives. No, she said, much better than that. Their husbands are owners of businesses. Usually, listen to the key word here, they inherited those businesses from their parents or their grandparents. And where did those grandparents inherit that from? And where did the great-grandparents inherit that from? There's such a thing as being pre-med and such a thing as being pre-law, and those are fine. But the best of it all is pre-dad. Yes, 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 thought your humble scribe. That's exactly right. Nothing can compare with owning a business where you start out at birth owning a stream of income that comes gushing at you. Did you hear that? Very few African Americans in this country can say that they come from a family where you are birthed into a family owning a stream of income that comes gushing out at you. And even if you are a poor white family that doesn't have land, most of them were at least left with a house that they could get equity from. All right? So this is important to understand when you're talking about capitalism and the basis of capitalism. He says, you don't have to work your way up. You don't have to put in long hours. There is no risk that you won't wind up on top. Money is yours from the capital that your parents or in-laws or other ancestors laid up for you long ago. But notice he doesn't talk about where they got that capital from. What could be better than owning a business where you don't even have to show up? Your employees show up and do the heavy lifting and you get the profits. That sounds great. So ran my thoughts. Now today this story might be different. There would be many charity events where women were the business owners either by their own exertions or by inheritance. But the principle would be the same. Fortunate is the man or woman who owns a business that tosses off money without him or her having to go into an office or onto a factory floor. God bless the child that's got his own, as the saying goes. But it doesn't say, but it really should say, God bless the child that's got its own from slave economy. That's the truth. Not everyone is an entrepreneur. But how do we do that? There are only a few thousand large family-owned businesses in this country. Why is that? Where did the large family-owned businesses come from? If I was his editor, I would have made sure that he understood that he needed to include where those large family-owned businesses came from, which was slavery, by the way. All right? There are 335 million of us Americans. Even if you took a smaller business, such as owning a string of dry cleaners in the suburbs of Buffalo, which would generate a lot of money, it takes a special, super high energy, self-starting kind of guy or gal to organize and run a business. It's exhausting. It's dicey. It involves large risks of failure. To inherit it once it's already up and running, is far better. Of course it is. But do we want to talk about all of the businesses that were destroyed, that were burned down, that were bombed, that the business owners were destroyed, that their next in line were also destroyed with them or lynched with them? So yes, this is all wonderful. This is great. Everything he's saying here is true, but it's not in the context of American history with black people. All right? So I want to stay in context. Americans are an unusually entrepreneurial race. I know we are. But if we are not born entrepreneurs, and if our forebearers weren't, what can we do? But what if your forebearers were, and every time they established a work, somebody came and tore it up, and somebody came and burnt it down? As one person said, these disruptions in progress did not help us. What can we do? We'll have to be, look at this. Listen to what he's about to say. We will, if we can't do it, we will have to be wage slaves all our lives. Boo-hoo. I don't think y'all heard him. I don't think you all heard him. He says, if you can't figure out how to be entrepreneurial, because I want to make sure y'all heard this. He said you will be a wage slave all your life. Did y'all hear that? Understand what that means. That means you're going to be slaving over your wages like a gerbil on a wheel, trying to progress and not really progressing. You will be a wage slave all your life. It would be nice to own a business, but maybe we're not just the type to own our business. Sad. So he's saying some people are going to be the wage slaves, and some people are going to be, this is the other piece he didn't say. Some people are going to be the wage owners. All right? They're going to be the people who set the wages. They're going to be the people who set the amounts. They're going to be the people who determine the value of the dollar. And so again, he's right, because what do you have? On one side, you have people who march and demand, right? They demand an increase in their wage because they're wage slaves, right? They're demanding that the wage move from $7.25, which is crazy, to at least $12, $15 an hour in some places. And then you have the owners of the wage. Notice, there are owners of the wage. There are some businesses who say, you know what? We are making money hand over fist. We are literally filthy rich, that we could actually increase the wages to $30 an hour and still, make millions and millions and millions in profit. So let's at least try to do the ethical thing and meet what the people are asking us. Okay, regardless if the government steps in and decides to do this, there are some companies who are now saying, you know what? We really should be paying these people at least $15 an hour. So because the government has not yet decided across the board, there are companies, yes, because of greed, there are companies who are stepping up to do the $15 an hour. Everybody's not doing that though. So he is very right in saying that if you don't figure this business thing out, or if you don't think you're called to it, you may very, very well become the wage slave, the person who is slaving for their wages, always being the one with the sign up, asking for somebody to increase something for you. Or you can be on the other side of that, determining the wage for the people who work under you. All right? Perhaps the genesis of this title tomb started there with my envy of the pre-dad class, or maybe just with the notion that there is such a thing as owning a business that's tossing off scads of cash, and it would be nice to be one of those owners. More than nice, the stuff that dreams are made of. Buying a piece of success. Or we could start with another incident. Back in 1973, 1974, after the Yom Kippur War in the Middle East, the Arab exporters punished America for its support of Israel, which had again soundly beaten the Arabs on the battlefield. The Arabs slapped an oil embargo on the United States. At that time, the United States was heavily dependent on Middle Eastern oil. This was before the miracles of domestic U.S. shale and fracking. The U.S. consumer in 1973-1974 saw an immense rise in the price of oil at the pump. But it takes an ill wind to blow no one any good, and there was a fine wind blowing for large oil producers. Some of the U.S. oil producers had vast holdings of oil reserves in the United States. They had acquired those holdings when oil was at 50 cents to the barrel or less. A barrel is 42 gallons. Suddenly, back in 73, oil was going for $30 a barrel or more. The profits to the oil companies from these oil fields were fantastic. I looked at this scene with the normal human reaction, envy. I said to my father at this time, these profits are just obscene. Now again, let's put this in context. Where did these oil-rich lands come from? Who owned these oil-rich lands in the United States first? All right? Let me give y'all a hint. Owners of the land who had been moved off the land, exterminated, destroyed, relegated to reservations. All right. So again, context. Yes, people are sitting on oil-rich lands. Yes, they bought it for 50 cents on the dollar, and now it's worth $30 a barrel. All right. But again, context. My father heaved a weary economist sigh and asked, do you really think the profits are obscene, and do you think they will last? Yes and yes, said I. Well, rejoined my brilliant old dad, you have some money. Why don't you buy some stock in the big oil companies? I scoffed at first, as smart aleck kids do to their genuinely smart parents. But when I thought about it, I realized my father was right. I didn't have a plot of land in West Texas where I could drill for oil, see it explode from the ground, and then sell it for millions. I didn't have a network of natural gas gathering hardware all over Oklahoma or Arkansas, but I could invest in a piece of the oil major. That was in a tiny way the same as if I did own a super small oil field. I would still get money from rises in the price of oil. I would be in the oil business. I liked it and actually did buy a few pennies worth of some oil companies, and they did well. That was my first inkling that I could, through the stock market, be a pre-dad. I could own my own teeny tiny business as if my ancestors had been in the oil trade. I should have seen it much sooner. Through the generosity of friends and relatives and my own savings from summer jobs, I had a small amount of savings, and some of these were in stock. But I saw the corporations in which I owned stock as faraway nations whose high poobahs lived lives of power and luxury, and whose stock sometimes went up and sometimes went down. I saw the stocks I owned as being valuable almost entirely through what Mr. Buffett calls price action. I did not see them as businesses in which I was an extremely junior partner. This silly idea that I owned a number on a Quotron and nothing physical was borne in on me by news media, which dwelt endlessly on day-by-day moves in the stock market, and not on the fundamental earnings of companies. The idea that I own basically nothing but a glimpse of a financial page was underscored by the reporting on the misconduct of corporate executives and their depredations against their holders. The media rarely, if ever, discuss giant corporations like Douglas, one of my first investments as an adventure in ownership of high-end aerospace. The company might as well have been on another planet. I was just owning a day-by-day price and a quarterly dividend. This was an extremely superficial analysis, to put it mildly. Owning stock was not just owning a note in a small type in a newspaper about what stock was selling for. It was owning part of a business. When we come back next week, we will keep going on that conversation about the pre-dad class. All right. Last book for today, and we are going to add another book in beginning next week, The Entrepreneur's Playbook. More than 100 proven strategies, tips, and techniques to build a successful business. So I just want to let you know that. Your score. An insider's secrets to understanding, controlling, and protecting your credit score. And remember, our ancestors were the credit. Last time we left off, we've been talking about what is your score? And we just covered that. And now today we're going to cover what hurts your score and what does not. What hurts your score and what does not. And if we can, we're going to try to get to today, how else is your score being used? So if you have pen and paper, get ready for 7 points on what hurts your score and what doesn't. Here we go. I'm sure you already know that missing a payment on your credit card or any other account isn't good for your credit scores, and that being late on your mortgage payments can eventually put you at risk for losing your home to foreclosure. But there are dozens of tight financial situations that many people find themselves in every month, and they make important decisions about what to do based on guesswork and misinformation, and they make these decisions while in total denial or complete panic. The lack of specific information about what consequences are out there can make every situation seem like a 4-alarm fire, or it can lull you into thinking something isn't a big deal when it's actually dropping a bomb on your credit score. So, when is the time to worry? And when do you have a little more of a grace period? What kinds of items should be getting more attention? In this book, you're going to learn the real story. As you'll discover, there are plenty of fairy tales, misinformations, and half-truths to wade through to get to the real stuff. For example, one of the biggest misconceptions about a credit score is that it has something to do with your income. It doesn't. You can make $1 million a year and have lousy credit. Likewise, you can be unemployed and have an 800 credit score. The second biggest misconception is that if you pay all your bills on time, you're automatically going to have excellent credit. Paying on time is great, but as you'll see soon, it has a strong influence on your scores, but it isn't the only factor. At least 65% of your score has nothing to do with paying on time. I hope y'all heard that. You're measured by how much debt you carry in relation to your credit lines, your payment history, the kinds of credit accounts you have, and how much credit you've been applying for recently. That is how you're measured. So, if you are of the mindset that you don't really want to be a debtor in this society, you like cash, you're not really buying things on credit, all right? You need to understand those parts of a credit score. Because there are some people, they don't need credit because they buy everything with cash. So they don't have to go through a credit process to get it because they have the cash and they just buy whatever it is. All right. But if you want to utilize the credit system, these are things that you need to understand. When it comes to damaging your scores, it works a lot like tearing down a wall. Some knocks on the outside walls produce superficial damage, while kicking out the foundation will make the building collapse a lot faster. Making a few payments a day or two late likely won't have an impact on your credit score because most creditors don't report those kinds of misses to the bureau. But if you start missing mortgage payments, which in the hierarchy of credit accounts are considered the most important, you can trash your credit score by up to 100 points in less than 60 days. We're going to talk a lot more about the various kinds of credit accounts, but here, let's give you a brief and straightforward list that covers what the most damaging acts to your credit scores are. So, number one, as he's just said, and I'll try to get all of these in on one board. Number one is missing your mortgage payment. Missing your mortgage payment, a mortgage payment. As I said, mortgage payments count the most in the hierarchy, and missing even one is hard on your score. These payments also tend to be the biggest ones you're making, which can make catching up on them very difficult. Once you're 90 days past due on a payment, the loan holder can start the foreclosure process. Number two, this affects a lot of people. Student loan delinquency. Most student loans are backed by the federal government, which means the debt cannot be discharged in bankruptcy, although they actually are trying to change that law. And if you're delinquent on a student loan, the collection agency can go after your paycheck through a garnishment and even take your federal income tax refund. The good news is that school loans aren't usually reported as delinquent for 60 days, which gives you a grace period to get current. Number three. Going 60 days late on a car payment. Missing a car payment is high in the hierarchy of bad things for your credit score because of the value the credit algorithms put on this kind of installment loan and because of the practical consequences of losing your car. At 60 days, car lenders can start the repossession process. Number four, ignoring tax debt. Tax debts are like student loans in that they cannot be discharged through bankruptcy. They'll also follow you around and make it hard for you to conduct any other official transactions with a government entity to which you owe the debt. All right. And I need this back side here. All right. Number five, going into debt collections on a credit card. Credit card companies generally start charging off your debt. That is, writing it off as permanently delinquent and moving it to a collection agency after 180 days. This presents several big problems, not including the big hit to your credit score. Once the account has been charged off, your credit card is closed, so you can't use it anymore. You also still owe the debt, along with a stack of fees added on by the collection agency. By the way, credit card companies can hit you with a late fee and a penalty interest rate even if you're 1 day late on the payment. But the lasting pain comes from a hit to your credit score. That starts happening at the 30-day mark. This is very, very, very good to know, because it'll start helping you understand when you get your bills for certain things. All right. I'm going to explain what I just said in a moment. All right. Number 6, 90 days late on a medical debt. It used to be in the past that medical debts were not added to your credit report, but because they are, medical debts can actually interfere with you getting loans for your home, loans for a car. Even though they say that they don't look at those things, the reality is they do look at them. Going 90 days late on a medical debt. Medical debts carry less weight in the algorithm than other kinds of debt, but a collection is a collection. At 90 days, these debts often get sold to collection agencies, and even that is in the process of changing. Because of the nature of medical debt, the New York State Attorney General is moving to demand that bureaus not report medical collections for at least 180 days. And I actually kind of agree with that. So on medical bills, before we go to the last point, on medical bills, when you see your little setup at the top, it'll say, usually if you're billed for something, it'll say 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days. And if you have not paid, whatever your balance is, you'll start seeing that balance move from 30 days. You may get another bill and you'll see that amount move over here to 60. If it's at 60, you're already having some negative impact on your credit, as they said, depending on what kind of thing it is. And if it's at 90, you already know it's probably been reported to an agency and is definitely having an effect on your credit score. And lastly, here's the last thing that people may not know is actually hurting their credit score. And I can imagine people who went through these last things with the storm and all of that. I imagine this occurred. Number 7, maxing out your credit cards. Your debt to credit line ratio is a big part of how your credit score is determined. If you run your cards up to the limit, this ratio will obviously not be good. Being late a day or two on a payment generally doesn't hurt your credit score, although it may subject you to late fees and a penalty interest rate by your company. Also, people often wonder whether a change in their job status has anything to do with their score. If you lose your job or start making less income, that won't be reflected in your overall credit score. Of course, some loans require income verification in addition to a credit score, and those would obviously be affected. The way credit inquiries, credit assessing your credit report to see if you qualify for a loan, affect your credit score is often misunderstood. You do take a small hit to your score every time a potential lender does what's called a hard inquiry. So if you're thinking about going out and, or paying it off, that lowers it. Yes. So if you're thinking about going out and getting a big ticket item, and the person who is doing your credit or whatever says, let me do an inquiry into your credit, you need to ask them, are they doing a hard inquiry or a soft inquiry? Because every time they do a hard inquiry, it does give your credit score a hit. All right? Meaning a check of your credit because you've applied for a new account. The hit is designed to warn the system of somebody who is trying to add to their debt burden, and the penalty becomes larger the more hard inquiries that come in during a short period of time. But one inquiry has a very small effect, and that hit disappears within a few months. So some people, when you're going for different things, some people will tell you they're going to do a soft inquiry, which is good because they're letting you know I'm not going to hit your credit report hard, which is going to cause harm to your credit, even if they're just checking it to see if you're eligible for whatever you're trying to get. All right. Lastly, as we close out today, how else is your score being used? How else is your score being used? So here's a common question. If you're not planning to buy a house and your credit card debt doesn't seem like that big of a deal, why should you be concerned about your credit score? The reality is that your scores are being used for way more than just strictly financial purposes. Since at least the mid-1990s, insurance companies have used credit scores as part of their policy underwriting process for both car and life insurance. A large study released by the Federal Trade Commission in 2007 conclusively established a link between credit scores and auto accident claims, which means that people with lower credit scores tend to file more and also have more expensive car insurance claims. Auto insurers use this information along with your driving record to put customers into risk pools. So if you have bad credit, they put you in a high risk pool. Bottom line, if your credit scores are lousy, you're going to pay more for car insurance. Now, I don't see anybody teaching that class. As many things as I've heard about credit scoring, all right? This connection isn't as strong with life insurance, but if you're declared bankruptcy within the last year, it's pretty certain that no insurance company is going to issue you a policy. And if you note specific financial issues on your life insurance application, the life insurance company will ask to run a credit check. Two other arenas where credit scores were used extensively are in the employment world and in the rental market. As I think I discussed this before. A credit check is routinely required for a variety of jobs related to financial services or related to security purposes in government. Many employers from all sorts of different industries do credit checks of potential employees who are finalists for a job. I know here in the DC area, if you're working for government, especially anything that has to do with like the FBI, CIA, Secret Service, because we know people that work in those fields, they will tell you they have to keep their credit score up. If your credit score becomes questionable, they actually see that as a sign that you could be prone to do something illegal because you have bad credit or you have things on your credit that need to be dealt with. So they look at that as a potential temptation of criminality based on what you have going on with your debts. All right. The Society for Human Resource Management did a study that revealed 6 out of 10 employers in the private sector do some form of credit history check during the hiring process. Well, this also actually puts certain people who, like he said, they may have the skills, they may have the ability, but if they have bad credit, it can actually keep you from getting hired. If you don't get hired, how are you going to earn the income, right, to begin to do the things to repair your credit? So to me, that's a catch-22. You're saying I need to repair my credit, but I can't get a job because of my credit. Therefore, I can't earn the income to fix my credit. You should know that potential employers do have to notify you if they're going to perform a credit check, and they need to use your Social Security number to run the check. The credit reports that employers see are different and less detailed than the ones creditors see as well. For example, they don't include credit scores or information identifying specific accounts, just information pertaining to delinquencies, bankruptcies, and legal judgments. If you're in the market for a rental home, most landlords are going to require a credit check before they let you move in. They basically want to get a look at your payment history to see if you have a record of walking away from your debts. Your credit report contains public records relating to any bankruptcies, foreclosures, and evictions you might have had. All the kinds of factors landlords take into consideration. And if you live in a slave state or racist state like Virginia, you could have no bankruptcies. You could have no foreclosures. You could not even have any evictions. But if you have anything on your credit report that they can nitpick at, they can still use it as a reason to deny you housing. That's a whole other teaching. But it is what it is. All right? So, this has been another Daring Dialogues. I hope that I have helped you in some way, shape, or form to understand what are some important things that you need to be concerned about with how your score is being used. All right? 7 ways that your score can be hurt. And I hope that you will begin to apply this to your financial life, your financial health and wealth, your financial education. And if you have not pulled your credit report for this year yet, I encourage you to get a copy of your free credit report and begin to look on there and see what is on your credit report. Don't be afraid to look. Don't be afraid to question what is on the report. All right? I want to thank you all for your time and attention. I hope that you have a great and wonderful weekend. Remember, you can come back and join us on Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Pastor Robert will be bringing the next part of the word that he began to give on last Sunday. And I hope that you all have a fabulous, peaceful, restful weekend. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. So please go out today and be light. Thank you again for your time and attention. If you know someone who needs this information, please don't hog it. Share. Sharing is caring. Share the wealth. All right? Thank you again. Take care and God bless.